Well, good morning, everyone. Oh, that was really lame. I'm going to be honest with you. That was not an enthusiastic good morning. Let's try that again. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Oh, amen. The community is gathered. Thank you so much. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Jennifer Brower. I am a member of the ministry team here. On behalf of my colleagues on the ministry team, the Reverend Ned Wight, who is preaching for us this morning, and the Reverend Dr. Natalie Fenimore, who is on sabbatical until June, and today's worship assistant, Robin Finan Jones, it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist congregation at Shelter Rock. As people of the Unitarian Universalist tradition, we celebrate the spirit of life that dwells within each person. We honor the diversity of theological and philosophical belief brought together in our gathering, and we affirm the use of reason and direct experience in our religious search for truth and meaning. We hope that each person who crosses our threshold in search of a spiritual home will feel warmly received and encouraged in their personal discernment. Whether you are a newcomer or a longtime member, we're glad that you're here today. It's good to be together. Following this morning's service, we'll reconvene in the social hall just across the lobby for coffee and conversation and our UU Cafe, where lunch can be purchased for a modest price. If you are a newcomer or visiting with us for the first time today, we hope that you will stay for lunch and that you will stop by our welcome table in the lobby to receive a guest ticket to lunch. It is a free lunch for those who are newcomers to our congregation. If you can't stay for lunch today, we still hope that you'll stay for some coffee and conversation. Those are free, and we'd be glad to spend time with you. And now, friends, before we enter into our service, I have a few announcements to share with you. While I do, I'd ask you to please turn off your cell phones. We have joked sometimes that we gather in religious community hoping to hear the voice of the holy, hoping to be called each in our own way. If the holy calls, the holy won't be calling on your smartphone, so you won't need it during worship. If you've brought with you a child or children today, I know that we are always glad to have kids in worship with us. We hope that they will always be with us and grow accustomed to being here in the sanctuary, because this is where we hope they'll ultimately come for worship. But if you have a child with you today and your child needs some activities, there are some quiet activity bags in the rear of the sanctuary down here and upstairs on the table by the entrance into the balcony. So if you need a little something to do, there are some crayons and some pipe cleaners and things. If you do have a child with you who doesn't want to be here in the sanctuary, we also have childcare programs today for our youngest kids in room 2 and activities and games for older kids in room 10. And an angel's gotten their wings. If you are in need of a little hearing assist, we have some hearing assist devices in the rear of the sanctuary on the main floor. Don't hesitate to use those. We do want you to be able to hear everything that happens in our service. We also have large print orders of service if you are needing a little visual assist. So don't hesitate to let us know what your needs are. We will do our very best to make this experience not just transformative and thought-provoking for you, but comfortable as well. After last Sunday's quickly extinguished but frightening fire, we will not be including in today's service the lighting of candles of sorrow or joy. We'll invite you to use the offertory time for your quiet contemplation and meditative personal practice. And we will be exploring our use of candle lighting in services to come. It is an important part of our ritual, as it is for many Unitarian Universalist congregations, but we all want to feel a little bit safer after last Sunday. We give thanks that our kids and our RE program are just fine, and that our teachers have recovered from that moment. Tomorrow our building is closed in observance of President's Day. The work of the congregational community will resume on Tuesday morning. Looking ahead, next Saturday, February 23rd, from 2 to 5, Reverend Ned Wight will participate in an interfaith seminar with representatives of various faiths at Temple Tikva in New Hyde Park. We're very glad for our relationship with Temple Tikva, and we hope that you will consider participating in that event. All are welcome. The occasion is the 100th anniversary of Gandhi's birth. You'll find more information about that event in your order of service, I believe, and in a poster out in the lobby. As always, there is in the back of your order of service a long list of activities and programs, ministries of this congregation. We invite you to take some time later on to look through those carefully and to be in touch with us about any that pique your interest. And there is a calendar for the week ahead. With that, friends, we conclude our announcements. In the spirit of fellowship and hospitality, I invite you to greet those closest to you. As we come back together just before our prelude is played, we have one more announcement, and that is that there's an artist reception at 1 o'clock in the art gallery today. We hope you all will stay after lunch and enjoy that too.
These are the words of the Reverend Rob Eller Isaac. For remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference. For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others. For the selfishness which sets us apart and alone. For losing sight of our unity. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. In lighting our chalice this morning, we affirm the unfailing renewal of life, rising from earth and reaching for the sun. All living creatures shall fulfill themselves, and we also affirm the steady growth of human companionship, rising from ancient cradles and reaching for the stars. People the world over shall seek the ways of understanding. Please rise in body or spirit to sing hymn number 1029 in the Teal hymn book, Love Knocks and Waits for Us to Hear, number 1029. Would you please remain standing and join in our words and song of affirmation, which are printed in your order of service. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve human need. This do we affirm and covenant with each other. You may be seated.
We are indebted to Blythe and her husband for that cautionary tale. I think it's totally appropriate for a Sunday in which we're going to talk a little bit about restoration and reconciliation, to know what the consequences are if we don't move in that direction. Thank you. Thank you very much. We enjoy a multitude of blessings in our lives. Sharing from our own abundance is, in fact, a spiritual discipline, a spiritual practice that expands our hearts and extends goodness in the world. With that understanding, we participate in today's offering for the good works of this congregation. Invite the ushers to please come forward at this time. And thank you for your generosity.
From the Fragmented World, responsive reading number 440. Please rise in body or spirit and join me in response reading number 440 in the Gray Hymnal. From the Fragmented World by the Reverend Philip Hewitt, number 440. From the fragmented world of everyday lives, we gather together in search of wholeness.
By many cares and preoccupations, by diverse and selfish aims, we are separated from one another and divided within ourselves.
Yet we know that no branch is utterly severed from the tree of life that sustains us all.
We cherish our oneness with those around us and the countless generations that have gone before us.
We would hold fast to all of good we inherit, even as we would leave behind us the outworn and the false.
We would escape from bondage to the ideas of our own day and from the delusions of our own fancy.
Let us labor in hope for the dawning of a new day without hatred, violence, and injustice.
Let us nurture the growth in our own lives of the love that is shown in the lives of the greatest of men and women, the rays of whose lamps still illumine our way.
In this spirit we gather, in this spirit we pray.
I invite you to join with me in reflecting on the words of the Reverend Bruce Marshall in his 1996 work, Taking Pictures of God, the essay on forgiveness. After her 3 a.m. feeding, the baby doesn't want to go back to sleep. So I hold her while walking the hallway, back and forth, back and forth. When we first started this routine, it was torture. I resented the interruption in my sleep and wanted only for her eyes to close so I could go back to bed. But I don't mind anymore. Sometimes she is asleep long before I put her into her crib. Thoughts come to me at 3 a.m. while walking the baby. Things I cannot see in the light of day. Comments people have made that haven't fully registered. Unformed ideas return and develop and grow. But most of all, memories come to me. Memories have occupied my nights recently as I walk up and down the hall. Memories appear that sometimes are painful and make me cringe. Regrets that I didn't realize were still inside now announce that they've been living there all the time. A prank played on a high school classmate. A summer job I said I would take and then just never showed up. An apartment I was allowed to rent as a favor but didn't leave in very good condition. Times when I've said things I shouldn't have, or more often, times when I should have spoken up and didn't. In the hierarchy of human sins, I expect these rate hardly a yawn. Quite possibly the people I've wronged no longer recall my transgressions. But these events remain alive in me, and I relive them as I walk the hall at 3 a.m. I am a third-generation Unitarian Universalist. My grandparents raised their 5 daughters as Unitarians, and by the time grandchildren came, this faith was deeply part of our family. I am grateful for my Unitarian Universalist upbringing. It's given me a religious identity, a set of values and ideals, and a way of being in this world. But this faith that has so emphasized personal responsibility has left me lacking on another front: the willingness to forgive myself. It's hard for me to put aside my regrets and move on. It's hard for me to understand that I participate in a life force greater than myself that creates and sustains and through which there is forgiveness. So it's 3:45 a.m. and the baby has long since fallen asleep, and I am still walking her back and forth. There's a quiet that comes before the light of morning. It touches and calms as it flows through the night, the house and me. I hold my baby tight and feel each breath she takes as it fills her body. And then there is a sigh as she lets the breath go. Through her, I understand that there is a grace in the world.
Way back in October, I preached about possible new mission priorities for the congregation to consider. And one of these was a ministry of restorative justice. This morning, I'd like to say a little bit more about what was behind that suggestion. In October, I suggested that we draw upon Unitarian Universalist principles and theology to develop model programs and strategies of restorative justice as alternatives to the systems of retributive justice that dominate our larger culture. Lucky for us, there is a huge body of wisdom and practice out there for us to draw upon. A number of years ago, I prepared a paper for my minister study group on leadership for truth and reconciliation. That's another way to describe restorative practices. They seek to bring people in conflict situations, people who may have hurt one another, into genuine dialogue, so that all relevant parties can get a more complete idea of the truth of the incident as perceived by each of the parties, and can help determine a way forward that repairs the relationships that have been damaged. Leadership for truth and reconciliation is especially challenging for us in this culture because we have set up systems to deal with wrongdoing, both criminal behavior in the public arena and hurtful behavior in institutions like our congregations, using a retributive framework. Retributive justice describes systems of retribution that allow wronged individuals to accuse, convict, and ensure the punishment of those who have wronged them. The focus is on the perpetrator, who in our criminal justice system is treated as a transgressor against the state. Often, the victim of crime is ignored entirely in the process. In addition, the perpetrator's family and community have virtually no role in the process of seeking justice, and the outcome is most often punishment, incarceration, and separation from the community. Restorative justice, on the other hand, describes systems that enable wrongdoers and those whom they've wronged to participate in a process that invites repair of broken relationships and the reintegration of the wrongdoers into the community whose rules, laws, or mores they have violated. In the case of retributive justice, the focus is on punishment for breaking the law. In the case of restorative justice, the focus is on relationships, repair and restoration of broken relationships. It's one reason why a growing number of UU leaders are taking a closer look at restorative justice and the growing field of what's called restorative practices, ways of dealing with misconduct or hurtful behavior that put relationships first, starting with the premise that human beings are part of a web of relationships. Dare I say, the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, that are worth trying to restore when they're damaged or broken. You'll notice that I snuck in our seventh principle there, the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, and I could have snuck in our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and our second and third principles, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and acceptance of one another, and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, not to mention a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, our fifth principle. In fact, these 5 principles speak directly to the values that undergird restorative practices: interdependence, personal worth and dignity, justice and compassion, acceptance and commitment to spiritual growth, and search for truth. No wonder there's a growing interest in restorative practices among UU leaders and congregations. They are tailor-made for us. Many of these leaders are working with youth and are committed to trying to replace retributive practices to youth misconduct with restorative ones. This is also the case, as many of you may know, in public schools throughout the country. Restorative practices have been adopted by schools and school systems in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, California, Maryland, Colorado, many other jurisdictions, I'm sure here in New York as well. So what do these practices look like in the real world? Today I'll offer two stories that give you a flavor of restorative practices at work. The first is from a film produced by the International Institute for Restorative Practices, IIRP, based in Canada. This is an organization dedicated to education, research, and intervention involving restorative justice. This 34-minute film is entitled Burning Bridges. In 2004, 6 young men in their early 20s decided it would be a cool prank to set a fire to a historic wooden-covered bridge in a small town in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. In a mighty conflagration, endangering firefighters and bystanders, the historic bridge was completely destroyed. It was a thoughtless act that devastated members of the community who revered their past and regarded the bridge as a symbol of all that was good about their small town. One of the staff members of the International Institute was from that part of Bucks County, and he asked if the community would be interested in having them conduct a restorative justice process with young men, their families, and community leaders. The IIRP interviewed all the participants individually or with their parents and asked them the following questions. What happened? What were you thinking about at that time and since? How have you and other people been affected by what happened? What can be done to make things right? After all these individual meetings, the leaders brought together all 20-plus people into a restorative justice conference. The leaders asked people in the circle the same question, only this time the perpetrators and the victims were in the same room and had to listen attentively to one another as each person spoke. It was an obviously painful and difficult process for all of the participants. From the young men, there were painful expressions of remorse and regret and admission that they had not thought things through. Duh. From their parents, there were tearful expressions of disappointment, emotional pain, and concern for their children and concern about their children's future. From the community members, there were expressions of grief and loss, of anger, of bafflement about why these boys, whom they thought they knew, did this thoughtless act, and of hope if some way forward could be found that would hold them accountable for their wrongdoing but would not destroy their lives. The outcome of the conference was a deeper understanding all the way around about the painful human consequences of this act of arson and heartfelt expressions of remorse from the boys. Excerpts of the conference were shown at the young men's trial and had some impact on their sentences. In addition to some time in jail, they were required to pay restitutions of over $66,000 each and to do 1,000 hours of community service. 10 years after the offense, many of these young men were still paying off their debts. Perpetrators ultimately were part of the labor crew that rebuilt the bridge and were present for the ribbon cutting when it was finished 4 years later. Some of them still live in the community, an outcome that would have been unthinkable if the community response had been retributive and they had been thrown into jail for 15 or 20 years. The second story was related to me by Paul Langston Daly, a UU minister who currently serves a congregation in Rhode Island and is on the national UUA staff as an advisor on restorative practices. This involves a small UU congregation where a member on her own had purchased a dishwasher some 10 years before. Conflict in congregations is always about a dishwasher or something like that. It was a controversial purchase, and the woman who bought it was ostracized by others in the congregation. She, however, refused to leave the congregation. Paul met with the board and told them that this simmering conflict was obvious to everyone who visited the congregation, and if they expected to welcome any new members, they needed to shift this energy. He crafted 3 questions and invited the entire congregation, it was a small congregation, to come together for a circle meeting. 35 people came and met for 3 hours. Everyone had a chance to answer each of the 3 questions through several rounds. In the course of their sharing with one another and of listening, all sorts of hurts came out. Hurts that in some cases had been simmering for years. They realized the issue was not the dishwasher, but who makes decisions and how decisions get made. As a result of the meeting, decisions are no longer made without communicating with the larger congregation. There was a major shift in their understanding of their organizational structure and a shift in their relationships. After they had had a chance to share their hurts and their shame about treating one another so badly, they discovered that they were all able to be nicer to each other. I believe our UU sources, which I've been preaching about this year, also point us toward restorative practices. The first source, as you may remember, is direct experience of mystery and wonder. If you have ever received a word or gesture of forgiveness from someone you have injured, you know what a balm that can be to your souls and what a chance that can give you to reclaim equanimity and move forward with your life. If you have ever offered a gesture of word or forgiveness or sought out an estranged person to see if you could invite some kind of reconciliation, you know what a miracle of grace that can seem, filling us with wonder and joy. Our human capacity for empathy and the humility that comes from admitting our own imperfections point us in the direction of forgiveness and reconciliation. The second source is words and deeds of prophetic women and men. 2 figures have clearly emerged in recent world history as exemplars of restorative practices. Former President of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, Chair of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Bishop Desmond Tutu. Mandela's refusal to pursue a course of vengeance and retribution, following decades of torture and imprisonment and knowledge of the widespread abuses against Black people under apartheid, is stunning testimony to the power of forgiveness. And the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, as documented with such power in Bishop Tutu's No Future Without Forgiveness, testifies eloquently to the transformative power of forgiveness and reconciliation. The fourth source is Jewish and Christian teachings, which I recently preached about. You will think of texts like Matthew 18. Then Peter came and said to him, "Lord, if another member of the community sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times?" Jesus said to him, "Not 7 times, but I tell you 70 times 7. The sixth source is earth-centered traditions. It turns out that indigenous cultures have long histories of utilizing restorative practices. In Bone to Pick, of Forgiveness, Reconciliation, Reparation, and Revenge, journalist Ellis Close writes about the New Zealand juvenile justice system, which employs the family group conference, a practice inspired by the indigenous Maori approach to conflict resolution. It draws together family members, a policeman, the victim, a social worker, youth advocate, and others to sit with the offender in a circle and devise a plan to keep the young person from offending again. In addition to accepting responsibility for what he or she has done and perhaps performing community service, the young lawbreaker is also expected to provide reparation. Close also describes peacemaking circles, adapted in part from Canadian Aboriginal culture, which provide the context for people to sit and listen to one another deeply, describing their wounds and hurts as the first step in a process of reconciliation. Wisdom from all of these sources call into question our current reliance on legalistic, retributive, and punitive responses to wrongdoing within Unitarian Universalism. This wisdom can inspire us to cultivate a culture of truth-telling, forgiveness, and reconciliation. The truth-telling of which I speak is the public act of confession and contrition when a person violates a commitment or a covenant or a law or hurts somebody. It is admitting that we have done wrong. The forgiveness of which I speak is the openness to accept that public expression of remorse and contrition, and to consider the possibility of giving the person or persons who have wronged us a second or third or 70th chance to apologize, to make amends, and to restore broken relationships. The reconciliation of which I speak is the invitation to move together through a process that allows for the eventual restoration of the bonds of relationship that constitute our communities when those bonds have been torn apart. There is a growing awareness among UU leaders in our district and nation of the power of restorative practices. Next week, the Reverend Dr. Hope Johnson and Andrea Lerner from the staff of the UU Central East District will be here to preach about managing conflict and to conduct a training workshop with the Committee on Ministry. I am confident that restorative practices will be mentioned in their presentations. Other members of the regional staff are conducting a workshop on March 16th, which I am planning to attend, where staff will introduce a range of restorative practices, including community circles, peace circles, restorative peace circles, and restorative justice conferences. If there is still capacity, I welcome others to join me. To become the powerful religious movement that we aspire to become, we need to conduct a thorough inventory of our thinking and practices regarding misconduct and wrongdoing in light of our theological convictions. We need to renew our commitment to chart a counter-cultural course for our people, our congregations, and our religious movement, one that harnesses the transportive power of love expressed through truth-telling and remorse, reparations, forgiveness, and reconciliation as the Unitarian Universalist way to establish and preserve the sort of human community to which our faith calls us. This is a daunting challenge. This is also an exciting opportunity. And this is the path we must follow if we hope to fulfill the promise of our transformational faith. So may it always be, Shalom, blessed be, Insha'Allah, Aho, Shanti, Amen. I invite us to rise in body or spirit and sing together hymn number 323 in the gray hymnal, 323, Break Not the Circle.
Nothing worth doing is completed in our lifetime.
Therefore, we are saved by hope.
Nothing true or beautiful of good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history.
Therefore, we are saved by faith.
Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone.
Therefore, we are saved by love.
No virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of our friend or foe as from our own.
Therefore, we are saved by the final form of love, which is forgiveness. So may it be.